I'll drink to that.
Welcome to Goodspeed Live at 5. I'll drink to that. I am one of your hosts, Michael Fling, here on the artistic staff here at Goodspeed, and I am so happy that you're joining us today as we discuss some interesting hot topics in musical theater that we've invented ourselves, because that's what we do. And we hope everyone is staying at home, staying healthy, and enjoying this lovely weather. I don't know about some of you, but I'm in Connecticut, and I went down to the beach this weekend with my mask on, but definitely got a little bit of burn because I'm a ginger. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and pour my drink really fast. Today, I'm just going to do a bourbon on the rocks, so we got a little piece of ice, and hopefully I don't think you'll be able to see it. I probably have to do it like here for you to see it. I'm going to take some Bullet Bourbon, also known as my favorite, and I'm just going to pour it over my little ice until it starts to crackle a little. And I just like to get it to float a little bit, and then that's how I fix my drink. So maybe not the most scientific way, but it is indeed what I do.
Please, any viewers, feel free to comment some of your favorite shows of the last 20 years, or some that you think should be considered the staples of the canon. Because there have been interesting trends that have come along in the last 20 years.
Absolutely.
In terms of like the jukebox musical really like rearing its head and making itself known. You've got the early kind of the comedy, the spoof kind of comedy genre that has always kind of been around, but feels like it had its apex in the early 2000s almost.
Yeah.
And then now we've gotten into like serious topic musicals a little bit, more adult. It's interesting how it all like flows, if there is a flow.
Yeah, and I think looking at the list too, I was thinking we really went through a meta comedy moment, meta theatricality and meta comment, where everything was commenting on itself all the time, and a show like Title of Show, which really was another kind of, even though it was a small show, it really like it influenced a lot of other shows because it so much was about, it was a show about people writing a show, and it was kind of, it's a show, that kind of layers of reality.
A show within a show type, thing.
Yeah, and a lot of like breaking the fourth wall and commenting on your own thing, and like that was a big trend for a long time that we saw going through. And now I think you said that we were also in a serious thing, but I think we're also in a kind of like formally rule breaking place. I think we have a lot of shows right now that are sort of doing their own thing. Everything from kind of Great Comet ushered in. It's kind of the era of Rachel Chapkin, really, where it's like.
Well, I'll drink to that because I love her. I think she's a genius.
I love her too.
I think she's an incredible director, and the way that she attacks storytelling and really allows and tells the story in the most interesting way that it can be told.
I think so too. And I think she's absolutely a director which is a rare thing. Her productions are far, far more than just the book and the score. And the design, it becomes a whole other creature. So it was hard when you're looking at something like Great Comet, like asking, is that going to be part of the musical theater canon, is an interesting question, because it's a beautiful piece of work, but it's also so defined by that initial production that it's a little hard to see like high schools in 20 years doing Great Comet, because it was defined by this like big, luxurious, luscious, even though I did see it originally at Ars Nova when it was like 3 stools and a shot of whiskey. So it can go smaller, but like, same thing with something like Hadestown. It's so indelibly linked to that original like creation that how are those shows going to have a life beyond that is a really interesting question.
Well, especially in the instance of Great Comet, she's really directing an experience. It is not just, it is an experience that it is a live event that you go through and happens in and around you. I feel a little differently about Hadestown, but I think that's also just because of the immersive nature of Great Comet was so specific and different for Broadway, that I think that's partially my reaction there. Whereas like Hadestown does feel a little more, I could see a high school doing it with its like 12 people and great music and all that, as opposed to Great Comet that's a bit more adventurous and it's just more complex in the way that it intertwines its storytelling, I think. But so what are some of what do you think, like, if you had to give, like, what show that you think for sure we will still be talking about and performing and doing in 20 years that has come out in the first 20 years of the century.
Well, I mean, it's probably the most recent and also obviously the juggernaut of the 21st century, I would say. But it's hard not to talk about Hamilton.
Right.
Because
of course.
it's the rare show. I mean, I think almost if you're looking at like the top 10 most influential, game-changing, mega hit shows, Hamilton is probably on that list. I think it's going to change the form of what's included in musical theater. I think the style of it is really influential. We're already seeing a lot of shows that are carrying some of its DNA, approaching historical topics, breaking them out of that like kind of rut where you're in their specific time and place. Although other shows before it did that too, as we saw with Spring Awakening, we talked that. But there was this like reverence for historical shows, and something like 1776 is a wonderful show. It's a great show and I love it. But like they chose to do it so it was set in 1776. Hamilton blew that wide open. I think it's kind of the king of the 21st century shows, and I think for a reason.
Oh, totally. I mean, I think it's hard to, and even the case that it was announced, I think just last week, that it's going to air on Disney Plus on July 3rd, and it kind of broke the internet. And I think when that broadcast happens, when that day comes, I think it's July 3rd. I might be making it up.
I think it's July 3rd, which made me think, oh, you know what, they're making it available for July 4th.
Right. And I feel like we're going to get, like, I can see the inevitable, like, New York Times headline story that, like, Disney Plus's servers break down with the demand of Hamilton. You know, it's like there is something that it has transcended Broadway and musical theater into the larger culture in a way that I don't think you can. I mean, next, I think the only other big, like, blockbuster that debuted in the 21st century that gets close to that, I'm speaking slowly in case something else comes to mind, but I think the only thing that comes close to it is Wicked in terms of transcending into popular culture and its strength of score, and it's just kind of like the hot ticket. It's the thing that everyone wants to see. It's become synonymous with Broadway for a lot of people.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, that's a good point.
So what do you... Oh, go ahead.
Well, Wicked is sort of less... there's no question it's like a juggernaut, big hit, and has influenced a lot of things, but like it's not the game changer that Hamilton is. You know,
no.
There's nothing about it that kind of is different than what came before it in the way that Hamilton is. But anyway, we can stop talking about Hamilton.
Totally. No, but it's a fair point that like Wicked is a much more conventional musical in so many ways.
Yeah.
Whereas because it is telling a pretty conventional story and telling it in a very pretty conventional way, not taking away from its wonder and its magic and all the things, but it's certainly not, in the same kind of groundbreaking.
Indeed.
Go ahead. You were going to say something.
I was just going to say, what show would you put on that list?
I've struggled with this a lot because I don't know if in 20 years, it's hard because so much of the conversation, even when we look back when we're doing podcasts or when we're programming or whatever, so much of what ends up having the staying power are things that aren't necessarily of a quality. I mean, some of them are of a quality level, but another element of it is like does the brand sell? Does that name, does that title sell something? Which is obviously a lot of what we're dealing with in the 21st century with the jukebox musicals and big name movie adaptations and yada, yada, yada. But I feel like the show that I think we will still be actively like producing, talking about, and a part of the canon in 20 years. And this might be like a not super interesting answer, but I think Matilda has that staying power.
Interesting.
I think it's of a quality. I think high schools will continue to do it. I think middle schools will continue to do it. And it will keep it front of mind. I think Matilda will be around in 20 years. I think it will.
They've just announced that they're going to do the film adaptation they haven't announced that they're doing it, but they've announced the casting, right? That I think Ray Fiennes is playing the Trench.
Yes, they did. That was like in the last couple of weeks they announced that, I think.
Yeah, quarantine time. Who knows?
Yeah, who knows? But I think that show has a big staying power. And I think the other show, I kind of forgot about this, but I think Hairspray will still be performed 20 years from now. I think Hairspray has kind of transcended to that point that it will remain a part of the canon.
That's a good one. I mean, I think there's a few. Certainly, we talked about Spring Awakening a lot on the podcast. Next to Normal, I don't think we can drop that one because I think that one is going to actually probably that's near the top. I mean, obviously a Pulitzer Prize winner, but also a small cast and dealing with a very relevant issue. Oh, my sister is on here and she says Billy Elliot. Yeah, Billy Elliot
Billy
is
Elliot, super possible.
yeah. I mean, the list is there's so many shows. Drowsy Chaperone, Light in the Piazza, You're in Town. These are all ones that I feel like Caroline or Change, which I think is actually a show that didn't quite get its due when it was first on Broadway, and obviously was
Yes.
slated for another major revival. But it's a brilliant piece of theater. I mean, this is a packed 20 years.
I mean, it's interesting too because you get into the, you know, what is deemed as producible, what sells, what, you know, and like something
Yeah.
like In the Heights, which is going to have a big name movie, but also because of the success of Hamilton, has catapulted Lin-Manuel into a certain category that I think in the Heights, as it should, I'm not saying it shouldn't, but in some ways it had almost kind of been forgotten as like this great show that happened.
Yeah.
And now it's having this whole new renaissance because of Hamilton, but it a deserved renaissance that it kind of didn't quite get its due, and I feel like it's going to stay around
Yeah.
for quite a number of years. It would be my guess.
Well, it's funny the ones that are like that. I mean, another one that's I think in that category is The Color Purple, which
Yes, I
kind
was
of
going to say that.
it was kind of a big sort of bloated production. I don't think it didn't do badly. I think it was a sort of a modest hit in its original form, but I don't
Yes,
think it got a lot of respect. And then that revival came along with that really stripped it down a little bit and catapulted Cynthia Erivo into all of our knowledge, which was great. And so that's now a show that feels like it has a better shot of being something that has a lot of longevity because of that revival. But then we talked about
totally.
that. I mean, just to go back to the previous century, a show that we've talked about doing on our podcast is Cabaret, which is another one. Like, there's a lot of shows that have had an interesting storied history, or Chicago, which was not super popular when it first opened on Broadway, but then obviously has become a mega hit. So it's kind of interesting how these shows have lives beyond their original production.
Well, and it's interesting too because we talked a little bit this week. Another show that I feel like did not get the recognition it deserved when it first opened on Broadway. It was kind of swallowed by the noise and maybe not the most smartly produced, you know, fill in the blank of whatever. But I think it is an unsung hero. Is the Scottsboro Boys, which I
Mm-hmm.
think is a phenomenal piece of theater and really a tough subject that needs to be talked about and continues to have relevancy. And I want to believe, like, and it's another Candor and Ebb show. Why I connected was it's a Candor and Ebb show that,
Yeah.
like, much like Chicago debuted the same year as Chorus Line, and therefore like kind of got swept under the rug. Scottsboro Boys debuted the same year as Book of Mormon, a show that we talked
Yeah.
about a little bit in terms of whether it has staying power. But Scottsboro Boys is so good, and I think it has an enduring quality that I hope it's still around in 20 years because I feel like that show is like it just needs like one brilliant revival to put
Yeah.
it back into the consciousness. But Book of Mormon, as a side note, like I think
Yeah.
Book of Mormon will probably, it's so, as we start to talk about the comedies,
Yeah.
whether or not they have staying power or stay funny, for me is rooted so much, at least for me, is rooted in whether it's a based in situation comedy or if it's like topical humor. Like, does that satire disappear with the years and the ways that like How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying, which is obviously a Pulitzer Prize winning musical in its day and still quite well constructed and funny, but doesn't have the same punch now that it did 50 some odd years ago.
Right. As opposed to where we were talking about Guys and Dolls, because that's our next podcast, which
Yes.
is a classic. Comedies are hard in terms of lasting power. Comedy types really change and they change fast. So, yeah. And I mean, I would like to think that something like You're in Town is actually going to last because it's a Brechtian parody, which is kind of like out of its own time. I don't know. I also just love You're in Town, so it will always be funny to me. But the things that are sort of using a trope or commenting on a trope that's a much older, more serious form feels like it might have a more lasting
Well,
power.
with Drowsy Chaperone, I mean, something that is in a
Yeah.
similar way is like commenting on the musical comedies of like the 20s and 30s,
Yeah.
which we don't do anymore, but it still, it has, to me, it remains hilarious because it's such a love letter to musical theater.
Yeah.
And the characters are so well drawn and whatnot. I have to admit, I'm not as familiar with Urinetown. So, and I feel like Urinetown is one of those shows that, like, unless you're a theater person, do you know Urinetown? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And where does that line
I mean,
fall?
I would love to have another production of Urinetown, although that first one was pretty perfect. And it's also, I will say, if you don't know Urinetown, you can listen to the album and get a lot of the score itself is quite funny. Oh, we have a comment here. I wonder if a quintessential production creates the map for the school and community productions that make a property timeless. Thinking back on Comet Hadestown as artisanal pieces. Yeah, that's certainly true. It's funny that there are certain shows that are very marked by their original productions, and certain ones that make that easy to translate, like we talk about on the podcast with Spring Awakening, where or a show like Pippin, which I did in high school, which is like, both of those shows are kind of designed to be scrappy and not super designed, and like just pieces of almost streetwear a little bit. And like with Pippin, you can kind of throw in whatever because it's sort of these traveling players. Versus something like Great Comet is going to be a little bit more of a challenge for someone to, or like Wicked is going to be really challenging for someone to translate to a regional production, high school version, because you have a character that's green, they're all witches, you have to go to Oz and everything has to be fabulous. It's like it has to fit a little bit into that world of like, can we do it in a sort of much more reduced way? It's an interesting question.
Well, and I guess in some ways, for me, the question that lies at the center of this is like, what do we consider still a part of the canon? Is it something like there is like, as we were talking about, like our favorites versus what is of a quality and those differences. But, a show, like there are certain shows that become iconic because the fact that like
Those of you watching. Oh, that's okay.
sorry, had something to do with my battery on my phone.
Your battery
but
phone wanted to chime in on this conversation.
it was like I have some feelings about how to last a long time. So I think that was pretty clever. Oh no.
I'm joking.
So all that to say, I think like a show like Seussical that was not a commercial success on Broadway, but I happen to have a very like, I have a place for it in my heart. I love it a lot. But is that a show that because of it's frequently produced in community theaters and high schools and stuff, does that somehow get it into a different category of it's re-looked at and maybe re-examined to be considered a lot better than it was? What is the, I guess, barometer? And I'm trying to think of like other examples from like from bygone era, like what's a show that was produced frequently in high schools but now is not for whatever reason. Like I'm trying to think of like examples. I don't know. Do you know what I'm saying? I don't even know if what I'm saying makes sense.
Yeah. No, I understand what you're saying. And it's a little hard for us to know because I feel like in a different time, the shows that were done in high schools and haven't survived are the ones that we don't really know about,
Right.
We have a comment from my dad. Any flops that you think will be rediscovered in Visry?
I mean, I feel like Seussical fits into that category because it did flop and was such a kind of notorious flop, and now it's gone on. I think it even has recouped its initial investment because of license and
Question. Oh, there you are. Hello.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Um,
I think my boss just called me, clearly forgetting that our boss just called me, forgetting we were on the show. Continue. Sorry.
It's Donald Lynn's fault. Well, it's interesting. I think that the one that I would say that I'm waiting for people to really dive back into, although I wouldn't call it a flop necessarily, the one that hasn't gotten its due that I'm waiting for a revival, for a chance for it to kind of shine, is the Full Monty, which was the same year as The Producers. So it got completely kind of tanked at the Tonys. It's a great show, and it's got a lot of heart. It's super funny. And I don't know, I mean, it's done somewhat, but I don't know if it's really, you know, it hasn't really gotten there. The other one that I love, which I don't know is if it's going to have the same lasting power, because I might be in the minority and it might be humor that's a little harder to restore, is I love The Wedding Singer.
Oh, that's an interesting take.
It's a hot take.
It's a hot take. I actually don't have the machine here to play the hot take, but
Okay.
I'll drink to that. It's a hot take.
But also, Michael Fling, I have a trivia question for you.
You have a trivia question for me?
Yeah, I've prepared a trivia question for you.
Oh God, this is okay. I'm nervous, but go for it.
Okay. Which of these shows was the first musical to open on Broadway in the 21st century?
Okay.
Your choices are Marie Christine,
Oh my God, how dare you?
The Full
Continue.
Monty,
Okay.
James Joyce's The Dead,
Oh,
or Aida?
oh, I think the answer is Aida, actually. Am I wrong? I'm
You
gonna
are
say
very
Aida.
close to being correct. It kind of depends on how you define a musical. Technically, the first one was James Joyce's The Dead, which opened on January 11th, which
Okay.
technically kind of is a musical. I think people counted that way, but like the biggest, and that was a transfer. So if you wanted to not have transfer, then Aida is correct. Full Monty opened in October of that year, and Marie Christine was the last show to open in the 20th century.
Oh, so it didn't even it didn't interesting.
Yeah.
Wow, okay. That was really hard. I thought you were gonna give me like four like big name ones, and I was like, oh, I feel like maybe I could do that, but that was tough.
Oh yeah, no, sorry. I was just looking at the ones that
No, no, it's
same
fun.
time.
It's a great trivia question. It's a great trivia question. Um, Back to the flop question. I think
Yeah,
we touched on it a little bit too with Scottsboro Boys because
yeah.
I it was a kind of a flop that I think should be rediscovered. But I'm gonna invert the question a little bit and ask you, what do you think are some shows that have been big successes that you don't think we'll still be talking about in 20 years?
This is a very interesting question. Oh, I have another answer for the flop one too, which actually never made it to Broadway, but I love it so much. Reefer Madness. Um,
Oh, I don't really know it, but I know a lot of people love it.
I think that's a show whose time will still come. Well, this is a tricky one, you know, because it's hard to tell sometimes. I mean, okay, here's one. I've already been on record about my not understanding the love for this show at all, so I will continue with this thing. I do not think that Kinky Boots is a good show. I don't think it's a well constructed show. I love the movie on which it's based, and I don't think I don't get why it was such a hit. And I think a lot of people kind of have the best, like there's a lot of elements of it that I think people love separately, and I've heard people define shows like of reasons that they love it, and I don't think that it's going to stand the test of time, because I just think ultimately you have to be a better show than Kinky Boots is, and I
I
wish I had done
think
work on it.
it's an interesting point, because I also think it's dealing with a topic that we've progressed our conversation in a lot
Yeah,
since it has opened, in terms of drag culture and just general queer topics. So I feel like that also might be a reason that it doesn't have the same kind of staying power.
yeah,
And I see someone brought up that they love Billy Elliot and saw it, and I love right back at you. I think Billy
yeah,
Elliot's brilliant. I would say Billy Elliot was a success, but I think it might not be something we're still talking about in 20 years because it's so difficult to produce, because it's so hard to find a boy, let alone two or three, to be able to produce it.
yeah,
Um, so simply for that reason, I feel like it might fall out of the conversation a
yeah.
little bit. I also, I'm trying to think of if there's another good, another good one I have that that like was a success that I don't think will stay around. Kinky Boots is a really good answer to that question, though.
Yeah, I mean it's an interesting one because you look at the shows that have opened, and obviously there's famous ones that are less, well, I wouldn't say this is like there are shows that are successes because of their context to a degree. I mean, I think Mamma Mia is famously the example of something that like was exactly the thing that we needed at the time we needed it, which was right after 9/11. And I think there's a few shows like that where it's an interesting question as to whether once we've moved beyond that time, whether there will still be that hunger for something like that. I mean, Mamma Mia, I think, is kind of a balm no matter what, and its brilliance is in its simplicity on some level. But I wonder about something like Come From Away, like that's such a specific story. Does that mean that it's going to kind of be harder to produce in 20 years when people don't really know that story as well and as specifically, or is it such a great show that people will always want that particular story?
I have a feeling that show will peter off in its popularity as people who experienced 9/11, who were alive on 9/11, start to get older and unfortunately leave this earth. I feel like it will be a harder thing because it is so. I feel like part of the reason we all love it is because it's such a happy, loving, human message out of one of the darkest moments in our history. And I feel like that is part of the reason it affects us or impacts us so on such a level. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. The other show that I actually, as I was thinking about like flops or not flops, but successes that I don't know have staying power. And this again is kind of a personal thing, and it kind of the show has a little bit already disappeared from the conversation, kind of, but I don't think Memphis has much staying power, and I really wasn't a huge fan of it when I saw it. And I kind of feel like that show is not going to stand the test of time, but it's a deeper cut. Like people already kind of don't know a ton about that show, so I don't know.
I don't disagree with you. I mean, it's also hard for me to tell because to me, when we talk about these shows that have lasted for a century, almost 50 years, 60 years, 70 years, the thing that kind of defines them all is that they're beautifully constructed, well-written shows. And I don't want to throw Memphis under the bus, but I think Memphis is another show that I just don't know if ultimately the writing is strong enough on that show to allow it to survive. I don't know, but that could be a personal thing too.
Well, but I think it's an interesting, as we think about, and I know we've talked a lot about amateur productions and things, but like the power of a title has a lot to do with whether or not people produce it or whatnot.
Right.
And like something like even The Addams Family, which I'm not here to hate on The Addams Family, but it's certainly not the most brilliantly constructed musical of the 21st century. But I think it probably will still be kind of a part of the conversation simply because people know what The Addams Family is. They may not know the musical, but they know that. And that kind of title recognition isn't. It's hard for me to think of older examples that mimic that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and I will also say, sometimes there are shows, just as there are shows that were flops that I think will be rediscovered someday. I mean, another great one is The Bridges of Madison County, which I think is actually an extraordinary show that made a few missteps with that original production, but somebody's going to do a really glorious chamber musical version of that show, and I think it's going to have a Color Purple moment where it comes back and it's like, what is this is amazing. But there's also shows that maybe Memphis is much better than we think it is, and someone's going to do a production that like knocks our socks off and makes it relevant to us in a way that it isn't right now. So it's fascinating how porous this conversation is, that the things that are currently flops that we don't like could come back in a different form and make a new case for themselves. The things that we think will be around forever might be something that falls off.
Well, and I think, the other thing too is like as younger theater artists that are going to continue to be around and be influential, I think it's important for us to hold on to the shows that we love respectively, and make the case for those shows in the coming years as we produce things and do things and work on projects, I guess, is the other thing, is like you kind of have to hold, if you think a show is special, you have to hold on to it and be like, yeah, I believe in this show, and when I get the right chance or opportunity, I'm going to try and work on that show, or at least prove to other people that it's a good show.
Yeah. And I think that's all it comes down to. I mean, theater's an insane business, and you have to do it because you love it and you believe in it. And everybody has different opinions, and no question, the thing that you love the most, somebody else thinks is total
Right.
BS. And the things that you hate the most, somebody else truly believes in. So, I mean, you know, American Psycho is a show that, like, I did not find super compelling, and there are people who will go to the mat for it forever and ever and ever. And I'm like, you know what? Maybe there's something to that show that I'm not seeing, because the love that people have for it certainly seems to pull it there. Anyway, that is all to say, I think that's a beautiful point. And ultimately, you just have to hold on to what you love and believe in theater, and hope that you'll find other people who also love and believe in it. Because otherwise, why are we doing it?
Leave it to this little optimistic ginger to be sappy and end the show on a sappy note after we've discussed all the things of musical theater. So let us raise a glass to, I think you might have finished yours, but let us raise a glass to the shows of the 21st century. Obviously, we'll know more in 20 years, so we'll be back. Maybe this video will come back to haunt us.
Maybe it will.
Like the poll quote, like the one poll quote is going to come back and be a tragedy for years to come. So I'll drink to that.
Yep.
All right. So next week we will be taking the week off because it is Memorial Day. So we will not be here next week. So it'll be 2 weeks from now when we have the show again, and it might look a little different, or we might try some things that are a little different after a brief hiatus. But we actually haven't decided our topic or our cocktail for that.
No.
So we have nothing to say, although if there's a topic that you think we should discuss, feel free to leave it in the comments and comment really quickly, because I'll do a quick scroll and look if anyone has some things they'd love for us to discuss. Otherwise, we'll go back to our list of things that we want to talk about. But it has been a joy.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Try.
Say that one more time. I missed it. Sorry.
Or a pun cocktail we should try.
Yes, we also love cocktail recommendations. So with that, I am going to bid everyone adieu. Thank you, Anika, for your insights as always. And everyone, stay safe, stay well. If you want more fabulous content from Goodspeed Musicals, check out In the Spotlight, our podcast, which is on Apple iTunes, the podcast app, Spotify, pretty much anywhere you get podcasts. Check it out. We did Spring Awakening this last week, which was a really fun adventure, I think, for both of us. And we're doing Guys and Dolls next week, so stay tuned for that. And then we have our Great Speed series, which is now officially on YouTube. We got some production upgrades, and we're going to be on YouTube tomorrow night at 7:30. So check out our website for more information on that. And in the home office, which will be guest hosted by this broadcast very own Anika Chapin on Thursday. Anika, who are you going to talk to on Thursday?
We're going to talk to Marshall Paylett, who wrote Private Gomer, my favorite new show written in the last year. So, well, last year plus now at this point, but this
week with the skipped out again. I'm sorry.
That's okay. It just makes you mysterious and exotic. It's like, ooh.
I gotta charge my phone. We had rehearsal for Great Speed before this, and I didn't get to do my normal prep, so I did not charge my phone accordingly, which was a mistake on my part.
This is the cash one. We're just drinking cocktails and chatting about theater.
As one does. Maybe we'll get an upgrade. Maybe we'll be on YouTube. Who knows? I don't know. I'm speaking out of turn. I should not say that. Mm-hmm. So, we'll let the bosses decide what we do.
Yeah.
But some exciting things coming your way, audience, in the next few days. So anyway,
definitely.
That does it for us here. Stay safe, stay home, and we'll see you all soon.
Yeah.
Bye, everyone.
Listen to a musical.